This episode is brought to you by Liquid IV. When you hydrate with Liquid IV, you're powered by Hydroscience. Hydroscience is Liquid IV's science-backed formula with an optimized ratio of electrolytes, vitamins, and nutrients. Experience great-tasting hydration for mental clarity, physical endurance, and overall well-being. Sip into something that up-levels every moment. Liquid IV. Tear, pour, live more. Visit us at liquidiv.com.
This episode is brought to you by Blink, an Amazon company. Think you're ready for Prime Day? With up to 50% off Blink Smart Security, you will be. With crisp HD video, real-time alerts, and two-way talk, you'll know the moment your packages arrive. Save big on Blink Smart Security, starting at just $19.99 with the Blink Mini 2 plug-in camera. Shop now at amazon.com/blink.
Welcome to Farm Year Daily, a Field Forward podcast. I'm David Geiger, your host. Today on Farm Year Daily, we get a Missouri corn perspective on the One Big Beautiful Bill with Darrick Steen. Then some hints of disease going on. We check out the eastern Iowa crop conditions with ISU agronomist Rebecca Vittetoe. Please be sure to like and follow the podcast as well as our social media at Field Forward Pod. We would love to have you join our community, keeping folks informed about what is affecting our farmers. This is Farm Year Daily. And joining me is Missouri Corn Director of Public Policy, Darrick Steen. Good to have you with us, and we're talking about the One Big Beautiful Bill. What does the passage mean for farmers?
Yeah, well, first, appreciate you having me on, and look forward to talking to you about this. Missouri Corn's been working on some of these provisions for several years, a couple of years. We're just glad to see some of them get across the finish line. I think this bill overall for farmers means longer term stability and certainty as it relates to tax planning, estate planning, as well as just overall managing risks on the farm in a better way. I think those are the overall takeaways. There's a lot of details that go into that, but at the end of the day, I think it means lower taxes for growers, some better estate planning tools with some longer term certainty, and ultimately, I think that means just increased profitability for farmers in the long term.
So there have been a lot of talk, as you were saying, about some of the impacts and positive aspects of growers. There's tax benefits at the moment, but this also strengthens the safety net. Can you talk about that part of the bill?
Yeah, so these were some of the improvements we've been working on for trying to get Congress to pass in a farm bill for 2 years running now. The provisions found their way in this big, beautiful bill, which is great. And a lot of the updates that they've made were the ones we were asking for, specifically updating the safety net, which farmers will recognize as the ARC and PLC programs, updating reference prices for corn, as well as many other commodities that will result in more likely to have payments and higher payments when the market has a downturn like it really is right now. So the ARC and PLC programs had both some substantial improvements that should better reflect market conditions and better manage risks on the farm. But there were also other improvements to crop insurance as well, some enhancements, some lowering of premiums, both for longer term growers as well as specifically beginning farmers. There's some provisions in the bill specifically targeting beginning farmers, providing lower premiums for a longer period of time, which should help some of our newer and beginning farmers, get their farming operation off the ground. And lastly, I'll just mention that there's a provision that's going to add some base acres to the Title I programs up to 30 million acres. There's a lot of details and a lot of things, conditions have to be met, but there will be some opportunity for growers who don't have as much base to add some base to their farming operation.
There are also some big increases to the market access program and foreign market development programs. Why are those so important for producers locally?
Well, we all know right now that, there's a lot of uncertainty in international trade, a lot going on in Washington, D.C. as it relates to trade. And, we need programs that allow us to promote and expand our agricultural products around the world. And there's programs that's been ongoing, but they've been underfunded for a number of years. And the big beautiful bill has increased the funding in those programs, specifically in what we call the market access program and the foreign market development programs. These programs help fund efforts to better promote and expand our exports. And we partner with U.S. Grains Council, which is sort of a sister organization to the National Corn Growers Association. And it helps them in their efforts, these programs, to market agricultural goods around the world for U.S. farmers, which is really important and key right now in this environment where there's just a lot of uncertainty around trade and how we're going to get those products to those export markets.
I mentioned tax provisions earlier on in our conversation. What are those permanent extensions and how are they helpful or effective towards our farmers?
Yeah, so I think there's two key areas here to think about in the tax space. One of them is sort of the short term, which is how it's going to impact taxes this year or next year, but also long term as it relates to just generally estate planning and how farmers are going to be better positioned to pass their farmland on to future generations. And there's important provisions in this bill that are going to positive for both of those aspects. Obviously, they're extending the lower tax rates are important. That's going to prevent high tax bills at the end of this year, as well as extending some key tax deduction tools that farmers, like bonus depreciation, that farmers use on a regular basis to help lower their taxes. Those were extended permanently. The estate tax, which is commonly known as the death tax, has been permanently extended and increased. So the estate tax allows $15 million worth of land, or up to $30 million if you're married, to pass that on to the next generation without being taxed via this estate tax. So that's an important tool for estate planning purposes. There's also a new piece in the bill that's new to the tax code that's going to allow, when farmland is sold and there's a capital gains tax associated with that farmland, it will allow that capital gains tax, to be paid over 4 equal yearly installments when the farmland is going to be kept in farming for at least 10 years. So it kind of spreads that tax bill out, where previously it was where you had to pay that all up front. Just another big hurdle that farmers often have to face when they sell land is that big capital gains tax bill at the end. So that will hopefully be helpful as well. These items, these tax related items, ultimately are going to pay off both short term and long term, I think, on farming operations across the U.S. And be extremely helpful for farmers in managing the tax bills at the end of the year.
That last note that you made there about the paying capital gains tax over 4 years, is that a similar vein towards that deferred rate that farmers can now use for passing land down to heirs? I think there's a separate piece aside from the estate tax that also is helpful towards making sure a farm can stick around despite maybe other kids' claims in the farm.
Yeah, that's this capital gains piece and that I was speaking of. And really what it does is it just allows those capital gains tax bills to be spread out or deferred, as you mentioned, just over longer periods of time, and give some flexibility to purchasers or to land sellers on paying those bills. And really, it's meant, the provision is meant to incentivize farmland to stay in the role of farming, right? And anytime we can do that, we can help incentivize farmland to be passed on to the next generation of farmers, whether it's a family member or not. I think that's good for agriculture in the state and in the country.
Before we go, you mentioned on the very first question, during the strengthening of safety nets, desire to still work on a farm bill. This One Big Beautiful Bill Act also does some pretty hefty cuts towards SNAP. It returns it to some pre-pandemic levels, but it's also soured some relations at the negotiating table between Republicans and Democrats. As a director of public policy, when you look at that from an objective viewpoint, what will it take for a bipartisan farm bill to happen in lieu of these cuts?
Yeah, obviously that's a bit of concern of ours, as well as many, I think, across the country, about how it impacts future farm bills and getting these policies extended. Because this extends, the Farm Bill for 5 years, and in 5 years, obviously, we'll be back at it again, extending these federal policies. I think at the end of the day, at least in the farming and agricultural space, it is still a bipartisan issue. We have support on both sides of the aisle, and both Democrats and Republicans support farmers and support the role of food production in this country. And I think they'll find common ground at the end of the day. Yes, this was a partisan bill and a partisan effort because of the factors in Washington. But I really think that that a full farm bill, is still possible. And, I think the politicians will find a way to make it happen.
Missouri Corn Director of Public Policy, Darrick Steen, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Darrick. This is Farm Year Daily. We will have more conversations on the way, but first, let's take a look at the marketplace. And there was red on the board at the Tuesday market close. September corn, 5.5 cents weaker, $3.98 even, with December falling 6.5 cents at $4.14 1/4. Soybeans in August, 10 1/4 in the red at $10.21 1/4, with September falling a nickel at $10.08 Soybean meal in August, $1.50 a ton in the red at $270.70. Wheat in September falling 3/4 penny at $5.47 3/4, with December falling a penny and 3/4 at $5.68 In the livestock market close for Tuesday, there was green in cattle. Live cattle in August, $4.07 a hundredweight in the green, $219.97, with October rising $3.87 to $216.82. August feeder cattle, $5.40 a hundredweight higher at $319.12, with September up $5.65 at $319.17. Lean hogs in August down 32 cents a hundredweight at $106.92, with October up a dime at $92.97 a hundredweight. That is the Tuesday market close. This is Farm Year Daily.
Culture evolves at the speed of light, just like your financial needs. When it comes to your money, Credit Karma keeps you in the know and ahead of the game. You can count on Credit Karma to keep up with your financial needs as they evolve. We'll help you monitor your progress and give personalized recommendations so you can make strides towards your goals and find your way to money. Intuit Credit Karma. Karma you can count on. Download the app today.
And joining us on Farm Year Daily, we have Rebecca Vittetoe, Extension agronomist for Iowa State University over in Eastern Iowa. Rebecca, always good to chat with you. It's been a while. How are things going over in your part of the state? And also, did you have a nice 4th of July?
Yeah, thanks for having me, David. Did have a great 4th of July. It's hard to believe we're already past the 4th of July. I feel like summer is flying.
Right. Is it knee high yet?
I think we might need to update that to almost tassel high.
Right. Shoulder high.
But no, things are looking pretty good over here in the part of the state that I cover, as you mentioned, more Eastern Iowa. We were fortunate. We got anywhere from around 1 inch to about 3 inches of rain in the counties that I cover over the weekend, and things are looking pretty good right now.
That is great to hear. As you are receiving phone calls from your farmers in the area, is there anything in particular they're interested in talking about at this time of the year?
Probably the big thing that I'm hearing about right now, or I guess there's a couple things. One is thinking about diseases starting to show up on the corn side of things. We start to see tassels and we start to think about those foliar fungicide applications. And so, especially with the wetter conditions that we've been having, I've had a lot more questions about what are we seeing for disease? What should we maybe expect to see? And thinking about fungicide application timing. So as far as, kind of what we've been seeing for disease, if I look hard enough out in the field, I may be able to find a little bit of gray leaf spot starting, which is not surprising given the weather conditions that we've had recently. That disease tends to like more moderate, warmer temperatures like we've had, as well as high relative humidity. So we've had some pretty favorable conditions for that. So not surprised that we're starting to see a little bit of that. I've also had a lot of questions about tar spot, especially since that was found earlier in some counties here in Iowa. I personally haven't seen any tar spot myself out there in fields. I have confirmed some tar spot in some counties based off of pictures, but it's like one lesion on a leaf. And based off of the weather conditions that we've had here recently, we haven't quite had the favorable conditions for that to progress further. I'm not saying that we might not see it later, but just with the conditions that we have had, tar spot usually likes more moderate temperatures, so like daily average temperatures between that 60 to 70 degrees. So looking at the high and the low and average, finding that daily average, which we've just been on the warmer side for tar spot, but it does also like that leaf wetness, whether it comes from dew or rainfall, especially if we have extended periods of leaf wetness, then we can dry off during the day. So one I'm obviously kind of keep an eye on, but more gray leaf spot is probably on my radar. So just something to kind of keep an eye out as you're scouting. And then, thinking about fungicide applications. We also have a long time of the growing season left yet. So, want to encourage folks to scout. And if we start to see that disease showing up in the fields, trying to time those applications. I don't want to spray too soon, but I also don't want to wait too long either.
So tar spot and gray leaf, kind of the top concerns you're getting as calls from farmers. As far as soybean disease, SDS, when is that window you guys typically look for signs of that?
So typically with sudden death, that's kind of a two-part disease. So we need those wet conditions around planting time for that initial root rot infection to happen with sudden death syndrome. And then that root rot pathogen produces a toxin that can move up in the plant and produce those foliar symptoms that we see with kind of that chlorosis, necrosis with the soybean leaves themselves. And typically we wouldn't expect to see that until like later in July here or into August. So maybe a titch early yet to where I'd be looking for sudden death syndrome. But we had the wet conditions earlier. That could be something we could see starting to show up potentially, especially if we stay wet here the second half of July into August.
That's right, because the first half of June, we definitely didn't have very much rain, but that second half into early July, we've seen a lot of rain across the state. Is your area, eastern Iowa, getting doused pretty well over there?
I would say we're kind of sitting in a sweet spot in general, where we haven't necessarily been inundated with rainfall, but we've also been catching some nice rains. I know there have maybe been a few pockets that have caught, like the 3 to 4 plus inches in a rainfall event. But in general, it seems like most places have gotten, 1 to 2 inches at a crack. So we're thankful and we're sitting in a pretty good spot right now.
As far as insect pressure, are you seeing very much activity so far in early July?
Yeah, so from an insect perspective, some of the things that I've been hearing about or seeing about out in fields, I know with probably a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, we started seeing some Japanese beetles out and about, and those are obviously still out and about, and have had some questions on that, more so on the soybean side, causing some defoliation. But as a reminder to folks, the threshold for our insect defoliators, and whether it's a Japanese beetle, grasshopper, etc., that's when we're in the reproductive stages, that threshold is 20% defoliation whole plant across the field. So we might see that, along some end rows, but pretty rare for us to see it across an entire field. Besides the Japanese beetles, also hearing some concerns and getting questions about corn rootworm, more so from people, maybe they had some downed or lodged corn with some of the thunderstorms that have come across the state, or just they're out there digging and checking roots and seeing some feeding from corn rootworm. So now is kind of a good time to go out and evaluate roots for feeding. And I have just, I think yesterday it was, saw my first adult corn rootworm beetle. It was a northern that it looked like it had just recently emerged.
Another note to make, weed season isn't as bad now that we've seen the rows fill for the most part on row crops, but if we move over into pasture or hay conditions, are we seeing any weed growth issues going on?
Yeah, so I mean, I feel like this time of year, anytime you look in a pasture, it's obvious to see the pastures that have some weed problems out there in them. Thinking about, our thistles, whether it's our biennial thistles like bull or musk thistle, or perennial thistle like Canada thistle, other, weeds we can see out there. I've had questions about wild parsnip, poison hemlock out there in pastures. And we can see those weeds pretty easily right now. But as far as like our herbicide application timing goes, this isn't like necessarily the ideal time that we'd want to do some spraying, especially with like the perennial weeds like Canada thistle, etc. Or even with some of our biennial weeds, and they're in their rosette stage. A fall application of a herbicide can be a really timely application, or getting them in the spring before they bolt or put on the flower. So, if we can potentially mow and prevent them from putting on seed heads, that's something to consider. But it also depends upon which specific weed species you have out there. But you can definitely make note of what you have present.
So you're saying treatment is best to do in the fall, and right now just mow?
Yeah, I mean, it's just with where we are in the life cycle of some of those weeds, that herbicide application might not be as effective, or we're kind of past that window when it would be the most effective.
Now, as we move forward into the rest of July, eastern Iowa you said it was kind of in a sweet spot for rain, so not seeing too many concerns about the Mississippi causing problems in the lower valleys. What are your main points of interest for the rest of the month?
So as we think kind of towards the rest of the month here, I mean, obviously we've been fortunate on the rainfall that we have had, but if we stay with warmer temperatures and just thinking about the crop water use, gonna want rain throughout July to keep things looking pretty good. And then also just thinking about that corn, a lot of cornfields either have started tasseling or by the end of this week will be tasseling. So entering into that pollination and grain fill period for corn. So thinking about any potential stresses we might have, or things that might potentially impact pollination and grain fill. And a lot of our soybean fields we're already obviously in the reproductive stages with flowering, and even some fields are starting to put on pods. So just kind of watching and seeing, any potential pest issues out there, just to kind of keep an eye on in case we need to do something. I know we talked about weeds and pastures, but now is also a great time. Most people have finished all their post applications in both corn and soybeans, but getting out and checking to see how effective those herbicide applications were. I know a lot of the rows are closed, but that doesn't necessarily mean that there's not weeds hiding out under them that maybe didn't die. So if weeds didn't die, it's a lot easier now to try to look at, okay, was it something related to that herbicide application that didn't quite work, weather related, environmental, or are we maybe worried about resistance? So just kind of keeping an eye on how well those herbicide and weed management programs are working for us.
Rebecca Vittetoe, ISU Extension agronomist for Eastern Iowa. Thank you so much for joining us on Farm Year Daily.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks again, Rebecca. This is Farm Year Daily, a Field Forward podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Again, in order to continue to produce this type of local content, we would love to have you join our community. So please follow the podcast, share it with your friends, and check out our social media channels at Field Forward Pod. You can also find me on social media at Geiger Reports, as well as WHO TV Channel 13 every weekday in their morning and noon hour programs. Again, I am your host, David Geiger, and I'll be back again tomorrow, everybody.